very much welcome to Radical Anthropology today. And we're really happy to be back again at UCL after so many problems last year, again, shutting down with COVID. So we're really hoping this is going to go all the way through to Christmas at this point. That's what we hope. So Radical Anthropology, some of you may never have been here before. Radical Anthropology is, we call it London's oldest evening class. It's been running 40 years or so at various places in North London, a free open access evening class on what it means to be human, what makes us human, the human revolution. And we've been in pubs, in community centres, in the Mayday rooms, in the Marx Memorial Library. And these days we're here at UCL Anthropology, which we're very happy to be. Why radical? Because we think that to understand what it is to be human, we need two major approaches. We need both evolutionary and biological anthropology, and we need social anthropology, which are all too rarely brought together as a kind of synthesized discipline. They're usually very much kept apart. So from an evolutionary point of view, what it is to be human, we'd be thinking about, well, what is it to be not quite human, like chimpanzee or bonobo? Why is it, what's the difference between them and us? Or we could think of our extinct, very close relatives, Neanderthals or Denisovans. And later in the term, we're going to have people like Chris Stringer, one of the world's greatest experts, talking about Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Alternative to evolutionary approaches, there are social approaches. Social anthropology asking, what is it? How do all the different human societies around the world organize themselves? How do they raise children? How do they organize sexual relations? How do they organize politics and society? So there's all those different approaches as well. So we think that they need to be done together. And the talks that we've got this term, and I would be bringing it up online if it wasn't so tricky to get hold of anything at the moment. The talks that we've got at the moment will be a mixture of evolutionary anthropology with speakers including Lucy Cook, the author of Bitch, a really interesting book that she's just published on the female of the species and the scientific patriarchy. Chris Stringer, I mentioned, also Rebecca Sear, professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who'll be talking about eugenics, the modern resurgence of eugenics. In terms of social anthropology, we do a lot of focus, the researchers at RAG, particularly on hunter-gatherer religion and cosmology, because we're very interested in human origins. And we're going to have some special talks, particularly from Megan Biesler, who's pretty much the world's expert studying je ne crois si, oral folklore from the je ne crois people of the Kalahari Desert. And she's going to be talking later in November. We also have a really special occasion with, I think, Alicia Colson, I think, is with us on Zoom, and she is going to be here introducing a whole committee of OG Cree scholars and anthropologists from Ontario, who are First Nations, Anishinaabe, OG Cree, Ojibwa, and they're going to be talking about their animist kind of worldview and telling us, and Alicia's been working with them in collaboration on their rock art and interpretation of rock art. So that's a really exciting talk early in November. So we've got a lot of combination of evolutionary approaches, social approaches going on. So tonight, to start off, we have really the founder of Radical Anthropology Group, who is Chris Knight, who is Professor of Anthropology at University of East London, but is nowadays attached here as a senior research associate. And Chris is famous for his book, Blood Relations. Blood Relations is now holding up the Zoom, holding up the whole Zoom, so I'm not going to get it out. Blood Relations, Menstruation and the Origins of Culture. You'll hear more about that book as we go along. Chris was also founder of the EvoLang conferences, a whole series of the conferences on the evolution of language, which is very much the subject of the book he is currently writing, which is title at the moment, Chris?
When Eve
Laughed is our provisional working title, which he's writing with Jerome Lewis, who also works here at UCL. I should say we modified the programme for tonight in the light of current events. This is why we have the royal coat of arms over my shoulder, so that we decided, I know that many people will feel they have had, as much as they can take as far as this whole period of mourning following the Queen's death. However, anthropology has a lot to say about monarchy. It always has, because anthropology was founded really on the question of sovereignty. And it's deep in the heart of the discipline. And you can think about famous kind of Victorian armchair anthropologists like James Fraser and the Golden Bough, which is all about kingship, the divine kingship. So Chris, I'm going to hand over to Chris on this subject, and I may be asked to butt in at some stage myself.
Yes, right, I'm going to be asking Camilla to give part of this talk. So it's fantastic to see you all here in the flesh at long last. So welcome to the Radical Anthropology Group's first lecture of this term. So anthropology asks just one question, but it's a massive one. What does it mean to be human? And as Camilla said, we can approach that question from a number of different directions. What does it mean to be a human being, Homo sapiens, as opposed to some other closely related species, such as a chimpanzee? We can ask about what it might mean to be a Homo habilis or a Neanderthal. And of course, the usual thing which people think of when we talk about social anthropology is to ask about all the different ways there are of being human. But of course, one of the things about being human is that all societies have a concept that some things are sacred. And there's one thing about all the world's religions, however different they are, this idea that at least certain things are sacred. Not everything's just got a price. It can be negotiated. That is a constant. So religion of one sort or another is a feature of all human societies. And in all, when anthropologists talk about becoming human, we know that we became human through Darwinian evolution, but we also know that at a certain point, something strange happened, something qualitative, a radical transformation, when we became the symbolic species. So in all cultures, we humans inhabit a world of symbols. And the thing about that is that we also inhabit the real world, of course. So chimpanzees, cats, pigeons, they inhabit reality. But we humans simultaneously inhabit a world of symbols. And symbols are, if you like, falsehoods. They're things which aren't true, but they're kind of useful fictions. Fictions which are socially acceptable, if you like, untruths, which are true on some social level. So we hover between those two levels, and the kind of standard philosophical distinction is between brute facts. A brute fact is a fact which is there anyway. It doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. For example, gravity. You can walk over the cliffs of Dover and you don't have to believe in gravity, you'll fall. Whereas other things like money, marriage, monarchy, citizenship, all these things which we inhabit as well, they have this strange property that they're objective facts. I mean, money, it's an objective fact. Two £10 notes equals £20. And yet it's entirely dependent on this subjective factor called belief. Now, why does that relate to the question of monarchy? Well, perhaps the monarchy is probably the easiest, simplest way to think about what it means to be a member of a symbolic species. And just think about, say, the Queen. You have the body natural, that's the person, and it was, of course, Elizabeth. and then you have the body politic. And so you have the two realities, the body of the person and the institutional fact of the person. And it's kind of, in some ways, it's not much point complaining about the monarchy, that it's all sort of smoke and mirrors, it's kind of hallucination, it's all show and so on, because that's actually the property of all institutional facts, that they're there through mechanisms to generate collective trust or collective belief. It's part of what it means to be human. So in the case of our current king, King Charles, we have the person, and then we have the monarch. And I'm going to illustrate this conflict between the person and the monarch, the fact that we have two bodies of this king, Charles III, by reading out something. And you might be surprised at what I'm going to read out, because it's the words of the current monarch in a book which he's written called Harmony, A New Way of Looking at Our World. These are the words of our king. I'm quoting from page 1, in fact, of the book. This is a call to revolution. The earth is under threat. It cannot cope with all that we demand of it. It is losing its balance, and we humans are causing this to happen. Revolution is a strong word, and I use it deliberately. The many environmental and social problems that now loom large on our horizon cannot be solved by carrying on with the very approach that has caused them. Now, I've read out those words to illustrate the fact that we have a monarch calling for revolution who is at the top of a pyramid of privilege. Two kings, the body politic, the body natural. In this case, a rather extreme conflict, I would have thought. Now, we've all been through, witnessed, maybe part of this astonishing series of events, the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. And I cannot simply ridicule all the things which have been happening this past few days. And the reason I can't is because I'm an anthropologist. And if you're an anthropologist, you can't go to some culture and discover very strange, curious cultural practices going on. You can't just say it's rubbish. Not if you're an anthropologist. You have to look at the details. You have to be a participant, observer. You have to try to make sense of what might seem at first sight to be complete nonsense, complete rubbish. There must be some deeper meaning in it all, and it's the job of the anthropologist to try to elucidate that meaning. And what seems to me obvious, really, is that we have all been suffering from disenchantment, and actually for several centuries. The Reformation actually was a deliberate effort to disenchant the world, to prevent people from seeing magic or divinity in trees and brooks and streams in the sky, the mountains. Don't be enchanted. The scientific revolution was very much about not allowing nature to cast a spell over us. You need to analyze objectively. Natural science is the study of things which no longer have a voice of their own. They're voiceless. You cut them up, you analyze them, you fragment them into parts. And by the way, I'm saying this as a scientist, I'm an anthropologist. That is, I'm a passionate believer in science. But somehow we've got to understand that along with natural science, inevitably comes the refusal to be enchanted by the world around us, and we feel disenchanted. And that word enchant, chanter, to sing. Australian Aboriginal people, hunter-gatherers around the world, if you want to enchant, you surround others, maybe a tree, maybe the world around you, maybe each other, with song. You sing. To sing something, to sing people, to sing together is to become enchanted, to enchant. And I think it's probably true that we don't sing together enough these days. And what's critically important is that an event like this extraordinary funeral is an opportunity to grieve, to sing, to feel, to connect in ways which normal capitalism doesn't really allow you to do. And I have felt unable to participate in this funeral. I'm a Republican. In the past, I have actually got into some trouble, and I even feel some difficulty in approaching this issue, because the last time that I tangled with royalty, I found myself banged up in Lewisham police station for 24 hours. I could explain what happened. It was the royal wedding. It was clearly something massively important for the state, and it was all largely done at taxpayers' expense. And I had an argument, which was that if this is at my expense and all of our expense, this event, this royal wedding, should be for all of us, not just for royals and monarchists and royalists. It should also be for socialists, anarchists, Republicans, and so on. And as a Republican myself, I needed to feel comfortable on this event. And as it so happened, I only felt comfortable with a guillotine. And so we erected, it was Punch and Judy. It wasn't serious, of course. We did a little polling exercise before the whole event. And the polling said that William and Kate certainly shouldn't be guillotined on the day of their wedding. And we came to a certain Prince Andrew, who we thought probably did need the chop. And so we were planning this major event with the guillotine. We tried out, experimented. It went very well with a melon. It chopped the head right off. And we were arrested for attempted street theatre on the night before the wedding. And it got into Anthropology today. Arrest for.
There's a very nice article
in Anthropology
February 2012 Anthropology Today. I've got a few copies.
Arrest for attempted street theatre. But what I want to stress is that tonight I'm not Mr. Mayhem. I'm not an agent of the government of the dead. I'm not wearing my street theatre costume. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm as an atheist, I don't believe in these things, and yet I do understand the need for respect for someone who's died. I'm an atheist. I'm very hostile actually to all patriarchal religions, but when I enter a mosque, I take off my shoes. So I'm trying to stress that I want to give a talk this evening, which is going to say to you things which I imagine you probably haven't heard before. And so I want you, it's difficult, of course, difficult for me, perhaps difficult for you, to put out of your mind the politics for the moment. So whether you want to bow to the monarch or chop his head off, all those things are very valid debates to be had. But what I want to do this evening is something like an archaeology of monarchy. I want to get to the deepest roots of this extraordinary thing called monarchy, because it's ancient. And in fact, if we manage to show the slides, there's a very strong argument that even during the Ice Age, during the Upper Paleolithic, and this is an argument made by David Graeber, but many other people have made it, you had something like monarchy going on when we were complex hunters and gatherers, complex hunters during the Upper Paleolithic in the Ice Age. You have there's a very extraordinarily rich burial, Sungir, about 200 miles east of Moscow. Burials of clearly very special people, sometimes special because they were deformed, sort of goblins or but the burials were so costly, with so many beads, so much red ochre, that clearly these were not the ordinary person. And David Graeber, I hope you know who is. David Graeber and Wayne Grove argue, but David, in The Dawn of Everything is a lovely book. I disagree with quite a lot of it, but they make the point that very likely, if these people were sort of kings, these special people were kind of kings, they were kings raised up for the pleasure of bringing them down again. So you had a kind of seasonal, periodic king for a period, king for a day, king for 2 weeks or for a season. And the argument that David Graeber and David Wengrove make is that if bringing down the mighty is enjoyable, then you have to know how to repeat that pleasure of bringing down by raising them up again, raising them up in order to be able to bring them down, maybe on a seasonal basis. But maybe before that, you had some kind of thing on which monarchy is based. Now, I'm certainly not saying that all the pageantry of the last week or so in London, all this that's been going on, I'm not saying it's genuinely ancient. There's a huge amount of invented tradition clearly going on here. Quite clearly in the past, not such a distant past, Daily Mail readers and the Daily Mail and the tabloids have put pressure on the establishment to mount making these almost overpowering ceremonies, inventing various components. But the point about these inventions of tradition is that they don't work except within a framework. And in RAG, we have developed, and here at UCL, but elsewhere, of course, the idea of a time-resistant syntax of magical ritual and myth. There's a kind of underlying grammar which has remained constant since we became human, in fact. So the details change, the politics change, the morality changes, somehow there's something remains which is constant. And that something is that there are two worlds, this world and the other world. And you move into the other world on dying. That can be symbolized by a flow of blood. And simply to move into the other world, to move from life to death through a flow of blood, is not magic. You move from this world to the other world, from the land of the living to the land of the dead, and there's nothing magic about that. You just die. And then comes the magic bit. You come back from the dead, and that is magic. And there's something about that movement between this world and the other world which existed long before we had monarchy as we know it. So now I'm going to quote from what here in UCL, those of us that are connected with the Radical Anthropology group, but it's much wider than that. The idea of the earliest ritual, which you can immediately see has something of sovereignty, something almost of monarchy. Monarchy is not the right word, but where you have a person who is cloaked in majesty, a real person, a human being of flesh and blood, who for a moment is a divine being. And that the name for that is the Eland Bull Dance of the Kalahari Bushmen. And one of the reasons why it's kind of uncanny that the Eland Bull Dance, which is part of the religion of the Kalahari Sun, is kind of relevant to this things which have been happening here recently, is that again, mentioning King Charles, Charles was particularly interested in the Kalahari Bushmen. He became strongly influenced by someone called Lorenz van der Post. And I'm going to now have a quote from Lorenz van der Post in a book, Testament to the Bushmen. A quote from Charles, friend and mentor of Lorenz van der Post was a close friend of Charles. In fact, Charles went on his honeymoon with Diana to Botswana, and stayed with the Bushmen for a while, kind of in the company of Lawrence van der Post. And I'm going to quote from that book, Testament of the Bushmen, by Lawrence van der Post and Jane Taylor, 1985. And it's describing this dance, the Eland Bull dance. Hopefully we have the slideshow to show some slides of that dance. I'm going to quote, "During the whole time of her menstruation, the girl must not touch the earth, neither must the sun fall on her." I mentioned blood. Blood is a critical feature of royalty. You've all heard of the idea of the royal blood. Without the blood, you cannot be a royal. Well, among the Kalahari Bushmen, perhaps I should elaborate this a little bit more. I think we all know, when I mentioned earlier, that some things are sacred. When things are sacred, deeply sacred, they must be respected. And there's an element of taboo in the sense that if you make contact with the sacred in a way which is inappropriate, in a disrespectful way, you've broken a taboo. And so the concept of taboo is intimately bound up with the concept of the sacred, and therefore the very existence of the symbolic realm and the realm of what I described earlier as institutional facts. Well, think about it. You may find it difficult. We can think of blood being sacred, and we know, of course, the blood of Jesus, the blood of sacrifice, the blood of the Old Testament, all that. But menstrual blood, it's almost impossible to include that because it's in our own culture so very taboo. One does not speak about these things. In the Kalahari, the major ritual is the Eland Bull dance performed when a girl has her first menstrual period. That's the most important ritual. Why does it matter? It's because these people are hunters and gatherers, egalitarian hunters and gatherers, who've lived in that part of the world, in southern Africa, in the Kalahari, longer than any people have lived in any part of the world. There's continuity of Kalahari Bushman traditions stretching right back, with ostrich eggshell beads and various other artifacts, which appear to be you can trace it back 40,000 years, maybe 60,000 years, maybe 80,000 years. Quite astonishing lengths of traditions. So arguably the Eland Bull dance, something like the Eland Bull dance in the form which has been practiced right up until recent times, goes back that far. Possibly, if you like, the oldest ritual in the world. And I'll just read this out again. "During the whole time of her menstruation, the girl must not touch the earth, neither must the sun fall on her. She must wear no beads or clothes. When she is led out of her hut to become the focus of a joyful ritual dance, she keeps her eyes solemnly downcast. This is because in her enhanced state of potency, she can affect the game that may be hunted in the coming days. If she keeps her eyes down, so too will the animals when they are hunted. They will not look up and see the hunter as he keeps up on them." So we have the idea that the girl's blood is the blood of the game animals, in particular the blood of this sacred animal, the Eland bull. We're going to be coming to the royal coat of arms on Iswaki Valley Pass, with the lion on one side of the unicorn on the other. But we're not quite there yet. But this is the topic of what's called the heraldic woman. There's a motif in the anthropology of art, which is extremely widespread. And I'll just introduce it by saying that the idea that a menstruating woman turns into a venerated wild animal in the Kalahari, the Eland bull, it's a local variant of a much wider idea, which is that the blood of menstruation is the same as the blood spilled while hunting. So hunter-gatherers have what's called an ideology of blood. And the blood of menstruation is sacred and powerful. And because women in the ritual they perform on their first menstruation turn into game animals, can you see if the women are dancing while menstruating, acting out being game animals, can you see that that ritual itself constructs the blood of the hunt as the blood of menstruation and therefore equally sacred? Is that clear? If you've got in a menstrual ritual and the woman herself is becoming the Eland bull and she's bleeding, the eland bull bleeds when you hunt it. And so if her blood is sacred, that means the blood of the game animals is sacred as well, which means deserving of respect. And so you have this kind of paradox that you're hunting animals, killing them, and they're bleeding, and you have to do so with respect, respecting the blood. That's a common theme described as the ideology of blood, common to hunter-gatherers across the world. So for all these people, the game animals which they hunt are in some sense blood relatives, deserving of respect. And from this, it is only a short step to the idea that menstrual blood is the life force of the game animals, magically influencing how they behave, and hence the menstruating maiden becomes the mistress of the game animals. She's influencing the game animals through her blood. I mean, I've just described earlier from Lawrence van der Post's book, Testament of the Bushmen, how the girl, as she comes out of seclusion, she's painted with a mask on her face. In this case, it's a gemsbok, an antelope, and she has to look down, because if she looks up, the antelope will look up and see the hunter. So she is the game animal. She's become that. And it's through the blood that that link is made. And because blood is so powerful, each community needed a safe way to manage the bleeding of young maidens, especially during their first menstruation. If this was done well, a young girl's menstrual blood was turned into something immensely powerful and beneficial. And it set up a structure of solidarity between all women, now presenting themselves in many parts of North America, the Arapaho, for example, as buffalo women. So, but either a buffalo or whichever animal is being hunted, and it's women are doing this in order to become sacred, and as a way of excluding themselves from sexual relations with men. So when women turn into game animals, the way it's very often put is, woman's biggest husband is not a man. Very often, woman's biggest husband is the moon, and the moon comes down to earth at dark moon, and women are consorting with the moon while menstruating. It's like a different kind of sexual relationship. And you'll see if you finally manage to get to the film clip of Van der Post in the Kalahari, you'll see the women during the eland bull dance. You sort of have to see this. It's just to read about it or write it, it doesn't quite work. The women are it's a huge joke. The women are having it's a laugh. They're full of laughter because they're laughing almost at the expense of their husband, to say they're having a lovely time with a much more mighty bull, the eland bull, who's actually the menstruating maiden who's turned into this horned god, this godly figure. And so whenever a young girl was led into such a performance for the first time, her introduction to adult ceremonial life was her initiation. Now, critically, this is the book which Camilla mentioned earlier, this classic of social anthropology, almost the beginnings of social anthropology in England and the West. Sir James George Fraser, The Golden Bough. So all over the world, chiefs, emperors, divine kings, and monarchs also have to be initiated, their coronation drawing attention to their uniquely royal blood. And if we look at this perhaps the best known of all anthropological masterpieces, published at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, in his classic work, Sir James expresses his astonishment at a pattern which no one had previously noted. He was mystified to discover that the very same ceremonial treatment traditionally applied to menstruating maidens was meted out to divine kings and priest kings everywhere in the ancient world. It was almost as if men could be vested with cosmically potent ritual power only if they could be conceptualized as, in some sense, menstruating. So I'm going to read out some passages now from Fraser. So he cites the Mikado of Japan, who profaned his sanctity if he so much as touched the ground with his foot. Outside his palace, he was carried on men's shoulders. Within, he walked on exquisitely wrought mats. Neither was the Mikado allowed to expose his sacred person to the open air, and the sun was not thought worthy to shine on his head. Similar precautions applied in Mexico to the supreme pontiff of the Zapotecs, who was, quote, looked upon as a god whom the earth was not worthy to hold, nor the sun to shine upon. And Fraser lists the king and queen of Tahiti, the kings of Dosuma, Persia, Siam, and Uganda as further examples of rulers who had to be carried almost everywhere to avoid their touching the ground. By the way, just if you look at the photographs of Queen Elizabeth during her anointment, during her coronation, she's under a canopy. The sun mustn't shine on her head. She's on a raised set of steps. Her feet must not touch the ground. And those parts of these traditions of coronation and anointment, in other words, you don't become connected to the divine without being anointed in that way. Those follow in that same logic. Now, I'm going to quote from Fraser again. It is remarkable that these two rules, not to touch the ground and not to see the sun, are observed either separately or conjointly by girls at puberty in many parts of the world. In parts of New Guinea, for example, daughters of chiefs, when they're about 12 or 13 years of age, are kept indoors for 2 or 3 years, never being allowed under any pretense to descend from the house, and the house is so shaded that the sun cannot shine on them. I'm reading out these. I mean, Fraser has this methodology, which is very much frowned on these days. He kind of thought that if you list enough examples of something, you're making a point. And that is not really a particularly brilliant method of working out, making a case. But still, you can't deny the fact that these examples are genuine. And so I'm just going to read out more or less from Fraser himself. Among the Haute Danums of Borneo, a maiden is placed for 7 years in a cell which is raised on piles above the ground and is lit by a single small window opening on a lonely place so that the girl is in almost total darkness. Among the Nootka Indians of Vancouver Island, girls at puberty were placed in each house in a sort of gallery where they were prevented from touching the ground or from seeing either fire or the sun's rays. The general effect of these rules, notes Fraser, after listing all these different cases, I won't go through all of them, is to keep the girl suspended, so as to say, between heaven and earth. And I hope you can see what's being said here, is that the treatment of girls at menstruation made them into supernatural, cosmically potent figures in precisely the way that a man or woman, in order to be a divine king, had to be treated. So the same structure of ritual, the sun may not shine on her head, nor her feet touch the ground, was applied. And so the point being made here is that if we trace these rituals of royalty right, we do get to something very like the Ilan Ball dance, where you don't have a queen. The girl during her first menstruation ceremony is clearly not a monarch. Kalahari wouldn't dream of having any such person, but for a period she has this divine power, and it's as if she's a monarch in the sense that she has this magical cosmic potency. And it doesn't work to say, oh yes, but she's imprisoned. She's not allowed to move, because you'll find that monarchs are imprisoned as well. Any proper monarch can't just do as they like. They're hugely constrained. All kinds of things they mustn't do. They mustn't do. So your potency as a monarch doesn't mean you can just go around doing what you please. You're hugely constrained in order to conform to these regulations. So origins of now you can. So what I'm arguing is that only through anthropology can we delve into the roots of something like monarchy. And although you have these invented traditions, as I've said, a lot of these traditions, of course, clearly invented, the common structure that the divine person must be kept from the sun and above the ground, all those things are time resistant. And again, on the body natural versus the body politic, let me just say, because King Charles, when he was in Botswana with Diane on their honeymoon, apparently during this honeymoon, Diane wasn't too pleased because Charles was busy reading Van der Post, all these long tracts on the spiritual values of the Bushmen, and she thought they were on honeymoon and should be having more of a sort of romantic time. But on this topic, for those who may not know, Richard Lee is a senior and highly influential anthropologist, a pioneer in the study of the San hunter-gatherers, the same people of the Kalahari, and it happens a good friend of mine and others of us, of course, in RAG. His political sympathies have always been communist, in the sense that hunter-gatherers are communist. And when Richard asked a Bushman whether he and his people recognized a king or a headman, he was laughingly told, "Oh, of course we have headmen. In fact, we are all headmen. Each of us is a headman over himself." And that's where the title of this talk came to me from. It's like, clearly, if everyone is a headman, no one's a headman. If everyone is king, no one is king. It's a way of looking at monarchy kind of abolished. But if you were to go back to something like what the Kalahari Bushmen do, you'd abolish the monarchy by leveling up. Everyone has royalty. Everyone has this chance to be sovereign. And of course, that is kind of the antithesis of royalty as we know it, where it's one privileged family end up with all that power. Charles has often expressed his deepest appreciation of the environmental and spiritual values of these same hunter-gatherers. And I suppose I'm just thinking of the, I don't know, it's the poignancy of the fact that, I mean, it's just so painfully contradictory that Charles's admiration, I mean, could anything be more contradictory than Charles's admiration for the radically leveling, egalitarian, uncompromisingly communistic values of the Kalahari Bushmen, given his destiny to be crowned. So I'm going to end shortly, and hopefully we'll get to the slides if they work. Who knows? They might do. I mentioned David Graeber, David Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything. Underneath this computer, I better not wave it around or I'll probably mess things up. There's a lovely book by Marshall Salins and David Graeber called On Kings. Okay, yes, okay, On Kings. Thank you, Camilla. Yes, on Kings. And what here we are, On Kings. And what Graeber says, building on Salins, is that he says that there are no genuinely egalitarian hunter-gatherers. There's never been genuine egalitarianism. Why? Because even the people who we think of as egalitarians, like the Kalahari Bushmen, but other hunter-gatherers as well, they have spirits, they have religion, they have gods. And Salins and Graeber say these gods are kings. They have kings. Hunter-gatherers have kings. And what they say is that, okay, these kings don't come down from heaven and clothe themselves, wrap themselves in the bodies of mortal humans, but that doesn't stop them from being kings, because these gods produce lightning, thunder, storms, deaths. I mean, kind of art. They have this arbitrary power that's similar to the power of a king, and humans, including hunter-gatherers, are kind of cowering beneath these cosmically potent beings, these gods. Actually, if only the two Davids, Graeber, Wengrow, and Salins had listened a little bit more to people like Richard Lee, who'd actually had experience of Kalahari Bushmen, they'd realize that hunter-gatherers don't have gods. The gods characteristic of hunter-gatherers are known as tricksters. And as Jerome Lewis will tell you when he gives his talk here, Jerome's worked among the Benjeli hunter-gatherers of the Congo. These tricksters, they're kind of gods, spirits, but you party with them, you joke with them, and above all, they're figures of fun. You laugh at them. And we have actually here this evening Helge Vierich, who's given us a lovely talk in Greg about the wonderful story of God's testicles. And it's a comical story, but there's no way these tricksters are powerful, potent figures under whom you cower. With these hunter-gatherers, laughter is their political strategy. Laughter is the fundamental leveling device. If you want to bring someone down and make them behave properly, you use leveling, ribald, often laughter, and you laugh at the gods, you know. So that's not a very good idea to say that these hunter-gatherers aren't egalitarian because they have gods. But equally, in the same book, and actually all these different books that Graeber and Wengrow and Salins have been written, I'll just concentrate briefly on Graeber himself. He says, listen, you can't abolish monarchy any more than you can abolish private property or the state. These things are part of the constitution of humanity. They're part of what it means to be human. You'll always have certain people needing to tell other people what to do. You've always got religion. Religion will establish that some things are sacred. Private property is an example of the fact that if you own a car or something, you've got the key. You don't want somebody else to come into it. Some things are sacred. And So hunter-gatherers can't be described as egalitarian, but also monarchy is something which is just intrinsic to the human condition, as is religion. I've got a different view, and I'm going to quote now from Karl Marx. And Marx says something very interesting. He says, we can hope to abolish religion, but only if we are sufficiently revolutionary to realize his dreams. I'll quote him now. This is Marx. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is a demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. So following up this idea, it would seem that the best way to abolish the royal family might be for all of us, the whole human race, to break through those palace gates and join in wearing those jewels, those crowns, those magic garments that once belonged to us all. Marx himself described the Paris communards as storming the gates of heaven. Don't try to abolish heaven, fight to establish heaven on this earth. So that's kind of it. And we're going to see if you can get the slideshow up. And it is up. Okay, right. So now Camilla's going to talk about this.
You jumped me in. You jumped me in. It's a bit of a anyway. Okay. Chris is talking about the invention of tradition, and a lot of the pageantry that's been seen in the last few days is pretty recent invention, like Edwardian or within the last century, Victorian. But if we go into the coat of arms, we're looking at invention of tradition as a bit older than that. It's more like 14th century, actually the date 1348 is the date I'm going to hang on to, because I'm talking about the order of the Garter. Now that's still pretty recent, 1348, compared to the Bushmen Khoisan traditions. But what we are seeing is slap bang menstrual, I'm going to use the technical term, cunt power, right in the middle of the royal coat of arms. So this is the technical, etymologically correct term, cunt here. This is it. This is the Garter with the motto around there. And it's like a portal to the other world, the world of the ancestors, a dream step portal into another world, a womb, but it's kind of a womb space. The story, the legend, the origin myth for the Order of the Garter is that a certain lady, who's called Joan of Kent, or the Countess of Salisbury, was dancing one day with Edward III, the King Edward III, during the period of the Black Death, actually, this is. And they were actually cousins. In fact, it's a bit of an incestuous. They were both grandchildren of Edward I. So it's a bit of an incestuous linkage. She's dancing one day with this guy, and her garter slips down. And everybody starts to laugh about this. But the king gallantly steps forward, picks it up, and says these mumbo jumbo words, which are right in the middle of the royal coat of arms. Honi soit qui mal y pense. Evil be, or shame to him who thinks it. It's like reflecting back. If you are laughing or trying to embarrass us, it gets reflected back on to you. And then he said afterwards, you know, you were laughing about this thing, think about what the thing is now, but later you are going to be honored, proud to wear it. And he puts it on to his own leg, this garter. And this is the foundation of this great Order of the Garter, which still exists today. Is like the inner cabal, the council of the monarchs of England and the United Kingdom. Now, if we think about what is this thing, a garter that fell off from a woman that then consecrates power to the king, who's her incestuous relative, it isn't too unreasonable to think, actually, that was a menstrual cloth. She was menstruating, that fell, he picked that up. His power comes from the proximity to his menstruating kinswoman, in fact. So this takes us right back to the whole story that Chris has been telling about the Elan bull dance, the girl's power, cosmic potency to enable hunting and fertility in the whole realm of the desert world, and to bring the whole community through the flow of her blood to move into the other world, which is what happens with the Khoisan Elan bull dance. Okay. Have I said enough? Is there anything else I need to say about that?
The next slide. Okay, so behind me is a beautiful bit of Southern African rock art, and it's a depiction in rock art of the Eland bull dance, the girl's first menstruation ritual, from a place called Fulton's Rock in Lesotho. Can we go to the next one? So that's the real picture. So, okay, so you can see in the middle here, can everyone see it? Yes. It's just in the middle here, we have a figure in a cloak. She is the girl. And around her is the circumference of the hut she's in. And inside with her are her attendants who are clapping. Clearly a lot of singing's going on. And if we manage to get to the film that the Van der Post talks over, you'll see in real life how the women are singing and clapping as the ceremony is being performed. And around her are the game animals, except that these are women who are acting out being elands. But it's how do I put this? The girl is not with her, the men, the real men, if you like. All the men have got a bar across the penis. So there's clearly no human sex going on. And if there is any kind of sex, it's cosmic sex. It's fertile intercourse between the girl herself, who's now turned into the Elan bull, and his wives, if you like, who are the women who are bending over and showing their buttocks to the bull Elan. And if when you see it in real life, it's a film, the women are just laughing aloud at the joy of the fact that they're not with their husbands, they're with somebody much more magnificent that they're having intercourse with. And it's just a huge kind of laugh at the expense of men.
You can see the little tails.
And so
these little tails were made out of ostrich eggshell.
Yes, yeah.
So they have naked buttocks with these little tails. They're doing this particular walk and dance, which is imitating the mating action of Elan cows with Elan bull.
Thank you, Camilla. Yes. And down here we can just see the silhouette of the actual bull Elan. Okay. Now this is the Lawrence van der Post and Jane Taylor book, Testament to the Bushmen. You can see here, these men have killed a Gemsbok, and they're bringing back the meat to the camp. And in that sense, they're respecting the Gemsbok, the animal. It's bleeding, it's raw, it can't be eaten, its blood is kind of sacred. And here, on the right here, is an enactment of the girl's first menstruation ritual. And so she's the girl herself, who's now metamorphosed into the Elan bull, the kind of god, if you like. She's in there, and around her are dancing the women. It's just indicating that this ancient bit of rock art, we don't quite know how old the rock art is, but it's clearly pretty old, is still being mirrored in real life when women have their first menstruation ceremony. This is just really brief. Yeah. The next picture, yes. This is just the cover of the paperback of my book, and here's the girl on the cover here. She is the girl who's looking down. Her face is covered with the markings of the Gemsbok, and she's looking down because she is the Gemsbok. And when the men are trying to hunt the Gemsbok, they want the animal to be looking down, not looking up and seeing the hunters. So the whole ritual is conferring hunting luck on the men. That's the whole point of the ritual, is to confer fertility, joy, plenitude, and of course luck in the hunt, critically. Next. Okay.
Right.
Now this is Queen Elizabeth in her coronation. A real photograph, actually. The sun may not shine on her head, nor her feet touch the ground. Some of you may have seen some of this, of course, in the Netflix film, The Crown, when, of course, you see exactly the same thing. And in fact, apparently, the actual anointment of the Queen mustn't be shown to the public. So that wasn't shown. A lot of the ceremony was televised, but the critical part of it, this part of it here, especially the actual anointment of the Queen, it's prohibited to be shown to the public. And just the next picture is Queen Elizabeth I. Again, the sun must not shine on her head, and her feet must not touch the ground. So, okay, now
it's worth saying this would be absolutely standard for any African king. Again, the
absolutely.
parasols that are being carried.
You just cannot have royal power in sunlight, and you cannot have royal power if you're part of this world. You have to be lifted apart from this world. As Fraser says, you're suspended between heaven and earth. In these cases, literally. There's a wonderful book, Luke de Hirsch, The Drunken King, which Camilla teaches about these rituals of kingship in Bantu cultures in Africa. Next one. So now, here, I hope you can immediately see this is the royal coat of arms in another form. This, of course, is the Cluny tapestries from about a bit before 1500. And this is the 6th tapestry, supposedly the 5th century, this is the 6th century. All I want you to see is, these things can, of course, be interpreted in all kinds of complicated ways. And I'm not really wanting you to see anything very complicated here, except huge amount of fertility, all these rabbits, the red background, the 3 crescent moons, the 3 nights of dark moon. This happens to be the coat of arms of a French sort of middle-ranking aristocratic family. But the point really is that here she is. She's not. Camilla was mentioning how in the centre of the British coat of arms you have this hole, this womb, this portal into the other world. Well, she's not a spread-leg figure, of course, the maiden here, but her tent is being opened, and above all, critically, we have the unicorn. The unicorn is not much doubt about this. Jerome's going to give a talk later this term. Woman's biggest husband is the moon. Every woman in a society where menstruation is so potent and where menstrual synchrony is at least a cultural concept, where women's menstruation synchronizes with the moon in belief, and therefore if you're synchronized with the moon, you're synchronizing with other women, then you're not with your husband, not with your mortal husband, you're with your moon husband. And the unicorn with its lovely, lovely long horn, in some of the, of course, tapestries, she's actually holding that horn. That's her other husband. It's a moon husband. And over here on the other side, of course, is the other husband, the husband of light, the lion husband. So a woman moves between these 2 spheres, these 2, if you like, these 2 husbands. I'm not sure if there's anything more to be said, except, unless Camilla wants to say a little bit more, but it's just that this is called
heraldic woman.
This is sorry. So the next slide. So this image of what's called the heraldic woman. The critical thing is that she's of that age when she menstruates. She's in control of the wild animals. She's the mistress of the animals. If we just so with the next few slides are just going to be showing this this motif. So carving in ivory from Minet El Beida, western coast of Syria, Bronze Age. The object is a lid from a miniature jar, and it was used by women to hide or conceal their cosmetics, very, very precious materials, of course. But the critical point is that here she is with these 2 animals either side of her, and there's a tradition in the anthropology of art of studying this motif known as the heraldic woman, the woman who is the center of cosmic potency, the mistress of the animals, very often with 2 animals, one on either side, the 2 animals in some kind of combat with each other. So let's just go through a few more of these before we start all this. Yes, okay, so now going right, this is not, okay, so this is Sungir. And this is just to illustrate the extraordinary wealth of this individual who's being buried. I was mentioning in the talk earlier on. It would be foolish to say that Ice Age hunters, paleolithic hunters, didn't have stratification, didn't have some kind of something reminiscent of monarchy, given these enormously elaborate burials, which clearly mark these particular individuals out from most people.
There's thousands of ivory beads, and it's taken hours and hours to make these, and they've been buried with the individual concerned.
Yeah.
And there are many other examples of these elaborate
burials. So, okay. Thank you. Next one. So, I mean, I'm just going to go through this. Here's Artemis, the goddess Artemis, as the mistress of the game animals. Again, you can see it's just so clear that she's got a hand on one of the animals.
And a feline. So it's like
the lion and the unicorn.
Or the eland bull.
Yeah. And the next one. So, I mean, I think the pictures speak for themselves, really. So you have a female, her legs open, her womb, a portal into the other world, animals either side of her. And okay, next one, please. Okay, so here, of course, and very often, the very similar images are the entrances of these, almost in Papua New Guinea and other places, where you have a men's house, a sacred men's house, where the myths say that originally this was a women's house, a menstrual house. The entrance into this sacred building is very much like this. This is actually a stone lintel marking the entrance to a fortified town, but where you have a door and you go through the door, you're going through this womb into a womb-like space. And of course, when you think about it, right to today, with going into a cathedral or a church, you're going into a womb-like space. And in the Christian tradition, of course, it's the blood which marks sacredness. It might be the blood of Jesus, of course, and of course, there's all kinds of arguments about why women couldn't be priests because of their menstrual blood. We got a bit of a challenge to the blood of Jesus. But the critical idea that blood is the substance which marks sacredness remains. And then just to end with, this just the last thing. This is just the quote I had. Of course, we have headmen. In fact, we're all headmen. Each one of us is headman over himself. Richard Lee. So, I mean, you can see what the argument is, that rather than simply treat the whole royal paraphernalia as kind of nonsense or rubbish, a leveling up argument, which is that would be another way of dealing with all of this. Rather, as Karl Marx said, the way to abolish religion is to realize it. Just simply trying to abolish it. For example, the substitute monarch with an elected president. I mean, the thing is, if all of us humans need and thirst for enchantment, for magic, for something above the ordinary, then somehow another way of dealing with all of this is to take back what was once ours. And if we go back to the Kalahari, we can see the way in which they would have absolutely refused to allow somebody to be enjoying this privilege and this magic at the expense of everybody else. These people are communists in a critically important sense.
Because their healing rituals are about distributing power equally and evenly to everybody in the society. So everybody has the prospect to go to that other world.
Now we're going to see, before we break for questions and discussion and stuff, we're going to see out if we can get the this little bit of the film.
Pick it up in the right place.
The youngest girl was immediately sent home because this was the most important news that could be told in the life of woman. It made me remember how I've always felt that the Bushmen were rich in a way we
The voice over is Lawrence van der
because
Vos.
for all these traumatic experiences, they had a ritual
Do we want the volume?
to help the individual to come to terms with the revolution from the cradle to the grave.
Go.
The mother took up
Not
her
touching
daughter
the
and
earth.
carried her back to the
Carried.
shelters.
Covered.
Girl is not touching the earth.
This
Covered
in
the earth.
itself was symbolism,
The carols.
reenacted of the most significant kind. It was saying directly to this girl that you will not carry this transition from girlhood into womanhood alone. And from that moment on, it was most impressive how close the whole community gathered around this girl, how they took her into shelter, how they stayed with her, and how they accompanied her through all the phases of becoming a woman. And this element of sharing is present throughout all the ritual that follows. Even the appearance of the men with dry forked branches, like the horns of the gemsbuck, which is an immense symbol of masculinity and masculine power. It's there to show that this world of men is from now.
The girl does a gender reversal. She becomes masculine. She becomes a bull. That's in the hut itself.
The women reinforce the importance of the appearance of the men with the horns of the gemsbuck by presenting their naked behinds to the girl in a movement which the gemsbuck
just see the girls how they're laughing at it all.
Uses during the mating season. Finally, when her menstruation is over, they decorate her face with the marks, which resemble very strongly the marks of the gemsbuck, this great symbol of fertility, masculine fertility. And she sits there at last fulfilled as a woman, with her eyes downcast, shy and afraid in case the new power, which has entered her, will take away power from the men whose world she will have to share in future.
It's the interpretation, actually. The paint. We could do with is, it'll be some charcoal probably, but there could be some plant pigment also that Ian would hold back.
The Stone Age people have a very moving story to illustrate the importance of the event for them all. And the story is just this. At the end of the initiation ceremony in Stone Age days, the girl, bewildered as she was by what was happening to her, felt bitter, and she felt rather sad. And towards the end of the day, she would look at the fire dying down, and look at it as if the dying down fire was the dying down of her childhood, and the ashes were the ashes of her burnt out childhood. And she would take up the ashes and the coals, and she would throw them up into the sky, and she would say to them, "You shall lie along the sky."
She's creating the Milky Way.
Creating the Milky Way, yeah.
Because she's fed up and pissed off with being in the men's provider. What it is. So that story about the girl making the Milky Way is similar to stories of the trickster making the Milky Way.
Okay.
Have we had enough? We
I
don't.
think we've had enough.
We've had
we
enough.
don't really need Vanderpost.
We'll leave that.
So
That down. I'm going to shut this
we're
down.
going to shut this down. Okay,
So
now.
then we don't have anything on the screen.
Now, luckily, thanks for your help. The phone still works.
Thank God, yes.
So over to feedback, questions, arguments, brickbacks, all of you.
Chris over there has a question.
Chris,
can you give us a shout and I'll repeat it.
Oh yes.
Well, actually, if you think about it, this is nothing new in this country. The last monarch in favour of revolution was William the Glorious.
Yeah.
And it was a top-down revolution.
Yeah.
Glorious Revolution of 1688.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of revolution he wants.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, clearly, the last person to lead a world revolution to save the planet from burning up would be a monarch like King Charles. And it's just, to me, just tragic that nearly all the left has long since given up even talking about revolution, mostly since 1989. For some unearthly reason, I've never been able to explain when Stalinism proved it was completely useless ideology and that didn't work. Most of the left gave up talking about revolution. And now one of the very last people to be still talking about revolution is our current king. It's a rather ironic and tragic situation. Even though, of course, the words themselves are kind of at least technically true about the need for something very, very dramatic. And I mean, maybe just worth mentioning as well, while we're on these topics of royals and their various beliefs about things. What have I got here? Yeah, I mean, this is quite recently, actually. This isn't anyone likely to be our king, but it's Prince Harry. And above all things, it comes from Hello Magazine, September the 26th, 2019. But he just says, this last week, led by Greta Thunberg, the world's children are striking. There's an emergency. It's a race against time and one which we are losing. Everyone knows it. There's no excuse for not knowing it. And the most troubling part of that is that I don't believe that there's anybody in this world that can deny science, undeniable science and facts that have been around for the last 30, maybe 40 years, and it's only getting stronger and stronger. I don't understand now how anyone in the world, whoever you are, whoever we are, you, us, children, leaders, whoever it is, no one can deny science. Otherwise, we live in a very, very troubling world. Again, reasonable words, but as I think the point you're making, Chris, is that a top-down revolution, a revolution emanating from people like that isn't going to cut it. It isn't going to work, even if literally the words are quite moving and in fact true. Yes.
We've got people on the Zoom. Is anyone in the room?
Anyone in the room? You're allowed to very, very profoundly disagree with everything I've said, by the way. Yes.
This is just a inherent human nature question of governance, the nature of friction between the person and the people as a direct consequence of evolving political infrastructures, decentralization. Origin of government, evolution of monarchies, a look at political power up to contemporary times. Appreciating the notion in comparison, if we were to contrast the relationship between the person and the people, and more so the distance between them as the small advances. For instance, tribal governance against a monarchy, and that's a more complex and abstract still suggests the same leadership, wielding as much or as little power. Among tribes, we notice a chief would have potentially fathered some, if not all, lower ranking roles, and be often the oldest among brothers placed there by elders. We can assume this order of affairs results in the lack of friction or order, so to speak. The distance politically as societies advance results in controversy. Subsequently, a key factor in the origin and formation of government in Western society.
Sorry, is this a quote from somebody?
Yeah.
Who from?
Not something I wrote just based on that.
Oh, it's
you're saying
your
it.
own.
Wow,
okay.
Can't you just tell us what you're saying?
It would be, the trouble is the people on Zoom can't hear it. Can we?
Is there any chance you could come up and say it to them so that people can hear you? Because I think reading it out,
Yeah, it's too quiet over there. We're not quite clear what it's saying.
I'm sorry.
Can you get
Just
through?
stand in front of that silly phone thing there. Come around.
Just say what is.
If you could perhaps say it without reading it back, we'll send that along.
Literally, it's just looking to why is the need for government, the institutional government needed?
Why do you need government in the first place?
When the monarchies become when they become more symbolic, and the need for government arises, because when we see tribal people together, they don't really have the infrastructure doesn't become as complex.
Yes. Okay. Can I move around?
Yeah.
Otherwise people can't sort of see me.
No,
One of the wonderful things that Jerome Lewis just says when he's describing government among the Benjeli hunter-gatherers of the Congo, he says that their only government they have is polyphonic singing, because the kind of singing they do, the way in which the parts of the polyphony are contributed by different sections of the people in the camp, that sets a model for how everything else is done. So if the singing sounds magical and enchanting, it's because everyone knows what to do to make the sounds beautiful, and then having established that, then when it comes to setting up a camp, repairing the grass huts, foraging for food, organizing a hunt, moving, all those things are going to work out because the singing is kind of their government, and it's a wonderful idea, which would suggest that the true alternative to monarchy is something like carnivals, a festival from below, where everyone, and we saw something rather like carnival with this Milan ball dance, where everyone's able to laugh and sing together and enjoy one another's company, and then people who are constructed by those experiences of ritual would be likely to be instinctively and spontaneously helpful and cooperative with each other, without needing to be told what to do by some command from above. I think that's what something like what you're suggesting.
I'm just wondering more about the friction between a person and their people as government, the need for government, and when it all evolves. Like a consequence of political infrastructure becoming more evolved and advanced always ends up in decentralization, because we have the monarchy, the queen as the head of state, but the need for a prime minister and the government it's to take some of that power away from the monarchy as things become more complex.
Yeah. Okay. So that's about the evolution of states and nation states.
The friction, inherent human nature of friction.
Yeah. So what we're trying to talk about here is something that's kind of running all the way through in terms of an aspect of symbolism that goes deep time, really, really old, and that particularly if you go to look at a lot of African mythology of kings, Bantu kings in Central Africa, this symbolism of the power coming from the menstruating queens is where it comes from.
The rain queens.
They're rain queens, and they're incestuous, they're in connection with rainbow snakes. And first that power goes to hunters, and then that power descends to kings, and the kings are warring. They're war leaders. They lead an expansion of the land to enable people as farmers to settle. And what the claim is that those kings who lead the war are able to guarantee fertility and rain. And so they need the symbolism of the menstrual queens to be able to do that. So they're still keeping that symbol all the way through. So even we can see it's even there down into things like the English kingship. But thanks very much for that perspective on that. On Zoom, Manchego, I can see your hand. Then Mark, I can see your hand, and then Wawalak, who I don't know. I don't think. Manchego?
You can't hear anything.
Manchego, you're muted. Are you muted? Manchego, we can't hear. Can't hear.
Oh dear.
Okay, Manchego, we can't hear. Can you wait? Can you try and work out how to do it? I'm going to move to Mark.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Can you hear
Okay.
Mark? Can you shout?
Sorry?
Can you shout a bit so people
Yes,
can hear?
okay. I'll speak more loudly.
I'll speak more loudly.
Yes, Chris, you've got to, well, I just want to pick you up on one point, which is that, I mean, this is after phone calls we've had with each other about this. It wasn't that Sir Lawrence van der Post ruined the honeymoon of Charles and Diana because he was there because they went to Botswana. It was simply that he wanted to read Lawrence van der Post books and Carl Jung books, and she wanted to do what most normal people want to do on honeymoon, and it was the beginning, if you like, of the end of their relationship. But Prince Charles does go in 1987, a few years later, to hang out in the Kalahari with Bushmen. And to be fair to Charles and Lawrence van der Post, they do put some effort into defending certain rights, as far as I understand, of the Bushmen in that part of the world. But there's a lot wrong with this relationship that Charles had with his guru, this guy Lawrence van der Post, which not just anthropologists, but I think all of us need, well, in Britain especially, need to come to terms with that Charles had was so influenced by this character. I mean, one issue, of course, is the fact that he was not an anthropologist at all. He just popularized the Bushmen.
Everyone hear this or not?
Yeah. He was very much into Carl Jung. He's very much into the idea of a collective unconscious, this idea of archetypes, this idea of nature. It has sort of, in my opinion, a rather reactionary aspect to it. And this is the major influence, this guy, Lawrence van der Post, on Charles's hostility to modern medicine and being in favor of alternative medicine. I mean, alternative medicine has a lot going for it, but Prince Charles's attitude is a little bit wacky, in my opinion. Worse than that, of course, is Lawrence van der Post is renowned now as being a fantasist. He made up umpteen stories about his life, about what he wrote about hunter-gatherers and much else, so he's completely discredited. Even worse than that, he manages to force himself on a 14-year-old girl back in the 1950s, get her pregnant. There's a huge scandal, obviously, understandably.
Yeah, it sounds like that's where the paedophilia begins, exactly. Isn't it? It's really bad.
It's really shocking.
Can we Mark, can we wrap it up, because there's other people with questions, and can we condense that? Is this?
I'll just say one more thing about Lawrence van der Post and his influence over Charles, which is that he was very much in favor of apartheid. A fanatical anti-communist, which is ironic considering he promoted the Kalahari Bushmen, who are communists. And in fact, it was van der Post who persuaded Thatcher not to support the ANC and to not impose sanctions on South Africa. He's had a very malign influence on all aspects of British culture. And I just think it's important, if we are going to mention him, we need to put this in context, that's all.
Lawrence van der Post was a pretty nasty piece of work.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that research on van der Post. That's great. The next person I've got with a hand up is Wawalak, and then I'm going to ask the room again, and then we're just going to wrap up soon, I think.
Hello, Camilla. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. It's Carlos, by the way.
Hi, Carlos.
Hello, Carlos.
How you doing? Hello, Chris.
Hello,
listen,
hi there.
Everything you guys had to say. Chris, I was wondering how you. I think what you were saying, the parallels there between monarchy and menage ritual, are bang on. Like, you know, I think it's all about fertility. They're both things. It's about but it's how it's consolidated either in the monarch at the head of society or in every woman that walks about. And that's a huge difference between the two. What I'd be really interested in, Chris, is how you think we get from one to the other. And I think somewhere in there, sorry if I go on, last time I saw one of your lectures, you was asking the question about how we can justify the possible primeval nature of like the menage rituals, and link that to how it's important, how we can link everything up in like human history, how it all carries on. I think there's something in there like that. But I was really interested in how we get from one to the other.
Small question.
Well, any.
Do people in the
Perhaps
room
you need
here-
another lecture on it.
Okay, I mean,
It's another lecture.
yes,
for us.
another whole lecture, but I've got no idea how you get from one to the other, obviously. In terms of anything very practical. But I mean, any divine king or queen worth their salt has got to be able to change the weather. They've got to be able to bring on the rains. They've got to be able to, I don't know, promote everyone's fertility. They've got to do these magical things which only a god could do. But it does seem all very strange, but when we think in terms of where it all comes from, the Iran bull dance, and we think of, okay, the fundamental principle of all these religions is on earth as it is in heaven. So you have the Milky Way, you have the sun, you have the moon, right across the world, the metaphor for menstruation is moon time. It so happens that the human female menstrual cycle is on average 29.5 days, the time it takes for the moon to pass through its phases from the earth. Clearly, the moon, the sun, the weather, all these things are connected up. So it's just that these ideas about being in contact and connection with the rains, the weather, the turning of the moon and the sun and the stars, those things make kind of immediate sense when you think in terms of menstruation, the flow of blood, the synchronization of the blood with the cycles of the moon. It makes a lot less sense when you're expecting some royal family to do that magic. But on the other hand, the claim of divine kingship, including even the sort of semi-divine kingship we have over here, is that really, if you are royalty with your blood, you should be able to promote fertility in those ways. I mean, the only thing I can say in terms of anything practical is just the idea that Karl Marx had, which is that the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on people to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusion. So I mean, if what people were doing during the funeral of Elizabeth was grieving, maybe ostensibly they were grieving about the Queen, but there's so much to cry about, so much grief. And if you get an opportunity to express all that grief, well, that's better than no opportunity. But is there not some way of being able to have all that without having all this privilege and the colonial past and all the rest of it? Is there not some way of keeping some kind of magical ritual, carnivalesque, bottom-up enchantment and singing without having to have a monarch? Quite how we get from one to the other, obviously, is a challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. More questions in the room? Anyone has?
Sort of was going to ask, but I think he started answering it already. But I was interested in how you mentioned disenchantment at the start, and I was wondering what do you think the world needs re-enchanting, and how would that?
Oh my God! Do I think the world needs re-enchanting? I would say so. Absolutely, we do need some magic.
To do that?
Well, I mean, I can say it very boldly. I can't make an argument because we won't have time, but I can say very boldly. I went to Carnival, Notting Hill Carnival, when it was happening a few weeks ago. Something like Carnival is a hugely healthy, wonderful antidote to capitalism and establishment thinking and everything else. Carnival is just, laughter, bodily enjoyment, tangible connection. It's wonderful medicine. So I suppose the argument I would make would be that maybe we are getting, as a huge reaction against all this monarchism we've had, we're no doubt about it, from October the 1st onwards, we're going to get a huge strike wave. If I've got a kind of hero, it's not King Charles, it's something a little bit more like Mick Lynch at the RMT, although hero worship isn't particularly helpful, whoever this person is. But just going on strike in itself would be a contribution to the problems of CO2 emissions. And going on strike across the planet and using the clocks that we evolved with, the sun and the moon, would be the kind of enchantment which I think we could gain inspiration from hunter-gatherers, because they work by the moon as well as, of course, by the sun. And so something along those lines, strike action, which isn't just passively not working, strike action, which is on picket lines which themselves are spreading and spreading, and which are a center of resistance as well as enjoyment and creativity. Something like that, kind of a global strike, against obviously the terrible, the very, very, very real threat that we've started to burn the whole planet up. But something like that would be my recipe as a way of re-enchanting planet Earth. But certainly we need something like that. We cannot carry on in the way, I mean, as you know, as we've been saying, we cannot carry on in this way. How we get there is another matter, but just maybe, you know, the few lessons we've had about what's been happening with our climate, the terrifying heat waves we had, with what's happening in Pakistan, with a third of the country flooded. Who knows? It may trigger some feeling that we do need something magical as well as just purely resistance and politics.
A reconnection with nature, maybe. So we need to be reconnected.
Well, I mean, one of the things which David Graeber and Wengo, the very important point they make in their book, The Dawn of Everything, is they say, how did we get stuck? How is it we got stuck? Instead of having alternatives and rhythms and periodicities, how did we get stuck in one system as if nothing else can happen? I'm making the point, of course, that it's now almost, well, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. Well, we got stuck with patriarchy. And actually all the myths of the world make that point. About the origin of death, for example, myths of the origin of death. All over the world, you have this idea that once upon a time, death was temporary. You'd die and come back alive again, die and come back alive again, just like the moon does. And then we lost touch with the moon. Maybe it was a hare, some silly animal that got a message from the moon about how to die and come back alive again. And the hare or the rabbit or the other kind of idiotic animal got it all upside down. And that's why when we die, we stay dead, which is a real tragedy. So something to do with the moon as well as the sun as would be a starting point, because there's no question about it. You know, I'll just say this: when we had the Hadza, two men from the Hadza come here to Rag, they said, "Where's the moon?" And they began to feel ill because there was like, we don't seem to have a moon, because in the Hadza country, every dark moon they perform their ritual called heir, which I've been privileged to be part of, where all the lights are switched off, any flame is switched off, and you can just see the Milky Way, and women are singing, and it's a magical moment, and it's a necessary moment of healing and darkness. It's like, let there be darkness so that we can really see. When there's too much light, we can't see the reality. And so something like that, I think we can gain inspiration from. In fact,
the principle of Lunake, how does it work? It works by this alternation of power, so switching of power. So the women's menstrual uprising takes the power and then surrenders at the full moon when the men have brought the Hemsbock back. And then the women are insisting they're going to come back and uprise again. So you go around the lunar cycle with an uprising, relinquish power, uprising, relinquish power. And that is the logic of the origin of the trickster. So the trickster isn't just a joke. The trickster has awesome power during the phase of ritual. And then when everybody's happy, when everybody's eaten, they can joke about the taboos, they can joke about the ritual, they can, you know, what was it like for you? It's like the people in the queue, they had to stand for hours, they had to be hungry, they had to go through. But then afterwards, they've got all these stories to tell to each other and create this kind of joking camaraderie. So it's this alternation between taboo, lose the taboo, taboo, lose the taboo.
So it's almost as if, I mean, as we know, we've had so many revolutions, and they all started out well, and they haven't, you know, the English Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, all the ideals of the revolution, and so often you end up with a situation pretty much the reverse of what the idealists who sparked the revolution, mostly women actually, had in mind. So if it's bottom-up revolutionary solidarity, which is the necessary dynamic to make society, you know, worth living in, the critical thing is you can't just have a revolution which just fixed everything. You've got to have it again and again and again, which you can't do unless you're happy to sort of lose the revolution in order to regain it, lose it and regain it. So there has to be a kind of threat against which you move in order to resist that threat, which is actually Morna Finnegan's concept of describing what happens among hunter-gatherers in Africa. Communism in motion. The women take power in something like what we've seen with the Ilan Ball dance. Goku is the word that's used for the women's rituals among the Benjeli. Women take power, laughingly, joyfully, seize control of the whole camp space, slightly intimidate the men, very raucous and provocative sexually, and then the women get fed up and say, okay, we've made our point, let the men take over. And then the men take over with their ritual, their power, where they strut about with all their masculinity. And then if that was to overstep its, if the men's ritual was to, if they were to outstay their welcome, that would be a threat. But the women almost want the men to constitute that potential threat so as to resist the men again. So it's like you win the revolution, you lose it on purpose, you win it, you lose it on purpose. That's something like what happens with the hunter-gatherers that we've been describing, and what we've decided to call lunarchy, not ruled by men, not ruled by women, not patriarchy, not matriarchy, but ruled by the moon. Seems to be what was going on. I know. I'm glad you're laughing because it is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm conscious of the time. Is there anyone, there's kind of nice stuff in the chat, but is there anyone online who would like dying to ask a question? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up and say something about next week. Anybody want to? Anybody here?
Okay.
I don't know if there's anyone who feels like they need to say anything about the events of last week and what they felt about. Was there anybody here who went on the queue? Was there anybody here who went and
did anyone in this room?
Oh, I'm just wondering.
The Queen lying in state,
or do it, yeah, or know anyone who did. No.
Okay, that's a huge relief.
Well, yeah, it's a relief, but I mean, you'd expect. I mean, to do anthropology, to go and talk to people in the queue is like, actually, it was an incredibly, would have been a diverse experience.
I should probably, in all honesty, admit that when Diana died, I didn't bring flowers, but Camilla and I, we did go up.
We wanted to go.
Parliament Square, and it was
very subversive.
That was a different dynamic. It was a very different dynamic because Diana was like the anti-queen. Yeah. She really was the kind of queen for all of us in a sort of strange way, and the whole. I mean, as we know, Elizabeth was sort of hugely grumpy.
Instead of everything being orchestrated from the top, in the case, absolutely, you just saw what happened in Kensington Gardens. Suddenly, all these teddy bears in the trees, and it was just like totemic offerings. It was quite extraordinary. So we realised what is happening. It's really amazing.
Time will tell the Dora did it. Events of the realm.
Okay.
Conspiracy theories everywhere.
Weird conspiracy theories. There is one last. Dickler, do you want to chip in? One last from the Zoom. Yeah. Can you speak up and we'll try and...
I will try to speak as loud as I can.
Right.
I wanted to say something about the question of how to do it, how to de facto, because I feel that what you quoted, we each one are head men. Yes, I am my head man. You are your head man. Camilla is our head man. Every one of us.
Yeah.
And as long as we remember this, as long as we remember this movement of the moon that is also inside our bodies, not only bodily, not only the blood, even the emotions from being very, very upset or in grief, we come back again with a lot of happiness. Something new is coming every time alive. So I think that the way to do the revolution is the way you guys do it. Every week, you give inspiration to people to explore their own things, the things that they make happy. And I feel that 2 years I'm exploring things that just move me, and I'm becoming my own headman. Very and in this world that wants to tell me every time how far do I have to be from every person, and what do I have to be afraid of, and what can I say to anyone? So becoming my own headman gives me back my boundaries, gives me back my yes and my no's, exactly what we like to see in hunter-gatherers, that they know how to say, hey, you stepped out the line. If someone is talking and they want to talk, they say, hey, whoa, what's going on? And the polyphonic, all these things that everybody is allowed. Everything can be celebrated. So I think this is the way to go.
Wonderful.
Couldn't possibly match that the way you put it. Absolutely wonderful. Everyone needs to have their yes and their no. Absolutely right. Fantastic. Yes. Yeah,
wonderful.
Wonderful.
I think you've given us the words to go out on. And somebody's just saying in the chat they're a carnival dancer, so maybe they can help teach
This
us
is
all.
the carnival. This is going to the carnival, being yourself in very deep
Absolutely.
ways.
Yes.
And I'm exploring legends. I knew Chris through legends, because I feel this is the way we can meet very deep things inside of us.
Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Let there be carnival.
So we need to wrap up, I think, and just mention next week, which is going to be, we shelved the lecture that was going to be tonight to next week instead, which is Chris is going to talk on, is male dominance natural? Yeah, which seems to be, everybody thinks it's natural as the fingers on our hands and so on, but is that really true? Is that how we became human? Is that necessarily part of human story? So do you want to say any more on that?
Well, there's nothing except hopefully we'll have sorted out the technicalities. I don't really know.
But anyway, it worked. I hope it worked for Zoom people tonight, and I hope it worked for people here in the audience. Thank you very much, everybody on Zoom. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for coming tonight. And I hope we'll see you back next week. And yeah, anything else to say at this stage?
Unless we want to go for a drink. Does anyone think of going for a drink at the pub?
Some people would. People would like to.
Okay.
We go to the Summertown Coffee House.
Summertown Coffee House. Do you know where that is? In Charlton
the street is Charlton Street. If we follow a lot, if we walk together, we'll get there. For anybody who'd like to, it's still not warm enough. We can sit outdoors, really. Thank you very much, people on Zoom. I'm going to see if I can
end it.
Thank you very much.